requires embassies to check applicants for what could be deemed as hostile attitudes towards the U.S. Applicants will be expected to set their social media profiles to public to allow screening. Failure to do so could be interpreted as an effort to hide certain online activity. Officials say they're looking for views in support of terrorism, anti-Semitic content, or signs an applicant might undermine national security. The new guidance applies to both new and returning applicants. After new guidance from the DHS, lawmakers will face new restrictions when visiting ICE facilities, though some say it undermines their oversight authority. The change comes amid instances. Also joining us is Hadley Manning, Executive Vice President and Fellow, the Steamboat Institute. Good afternoon to you both. Mike, I'll start with you today. What is this new policy of requiring social media access? Tell us about the Trump administration's evolving view of student visas and national security. What do you think?
Yeah, Don, good question. Good to see everybody, first and foremost. Happy Thursday. Look, for people that don't know the way the program works, right, when you're applying for a student visa and you get enrolled into one of the universities or get accepted into one of the universities, there's already like a 5 to 6 step process in addition to what you have to do with respect to meeting somebody from the State Department and get all your paperwork in order, and then obviously go through the proper vetting, classifications or qualifications, whatever it is that they do before. This is an add-on to that, right? With respect to looking at social media history, seeing things that could be incendiary, inflammatory. Look, I have to be honest, because I live down here in Miami. I happen to know Senator Marco Rubio, and I know the background of his family, and coming from Cuba, he's talked about the dangers of doing this in a different country where him and my parents are both from with respect to Cuba. But be that as it may, this is within the State Department's purview to add this as a qualifier when people are accepted into the program by their university, and they're just adding it as another checkpoint when you go in for your student visa appointment. So again, for the folks out there that are students in foreign countries that are looking to apply and potentially get accepted into math or engineering programs here in the U.S., I would highly encourage you right now to make sure you have everything already in order from your paperwork perspective, but you may have to scrub through your social media accounts, unfortunately.
Okay, Hadley, what are your thoughts here on the student visas action and social media being involved?
Immigration policy from our borders to visas has dangers on all sides. We can become so restrictive that as a nation, we miss out on some of the best and brightest students who want to come to our research institutions, to our universities in the United States. On the other hand, if we have not been restrictive enough, then that could pose a risk to our national security and to our national interests. So I agree, it's within the State Department's purview to do this, and I think this is consistent with what we're seeing across the board from the Trump administration, largely when it comes to immigration, with more restrictions, more caution when it comes to who enters the country. Largely all of this a correction to policies we saw under the previous administration, the Biden administration. So this doesn't come as a surprise. I think ultimately the State Department's trying to act in our best national interest and our national security interest. As an American, I am incredibly blessed that I have this freedom to speak freely, to share my opinions, to criticize my own government. However, entering the United States as someone who's not born here, who didn't have that great blessing of being born in the United States, you have a different set of responsibilities and parameters, and ultimately entry to the United States is a privilege for people who are not born here. Now, that's not fair. It's a great unfairness that some people are born in the United States and some people are born in countries, even countries that are not friendly to the United States, and that might count against them in some ways as they apply for a visa or for citizenship. But ultimately, we want the most fair practice. We'll never reach perfect fairness in immigration policy, but we want the most fair practice and the one that works in our best national interest.
Okay, let's go into some of the specifics here. And on the point of fairness, Mike, is the refusal to make social media accounts public, is that a fair basis for rejection in your opinion?
Well, I mean, look, Senator Marco Rubio, and this is one of the reasons why I'm okay with him being potentially in the State Department. He already is in the State Department, I should say. But it was because one of the things that he had talked about was social media. Everybody knows Section 230 and what social media and these platforms do from a content moderation standpoint, right? Headley's absolutely right. You should be allowed to criticize your government, and it could be unfair that somebody that's from another country criticizes their government. I mean, the government of the United States. I mean, look Look where I live down here in Miami, Don. 26 students on student visa from Florida International University and the University of Miami were all kicked out. Some of them because of the protests and what was happening in Gaza with the war in Gaza. And so, is it fair? Is it unfair? I mean, that's not the right question. The question is that this is unfortunately the consequence of an election. Elections have consequences. New people are put into place that oversee the agencies, and they've added new rules to the books. And I don't understand why we're chasing as a media, and NTD hasn't done this, so thankfully, all of these stories of folks that are like, oh, this is not what I voted for. This is not what no, this is exactly what you voted for. This is exactly what President Trump, then candidate Trump, campaigned on. Did he campaign to the callous nature that you're mentioning, Don? No, but it said mass deportations now when it was at the RNC. They said that immigration is broken, right? They said the system was broken. This is the way that they're going about fixing it. And this is a consequence of that election and these people that are put in place. So is it callous? It's not for me to answer because it's now a State Department policy, the way they're implementing it. And it's an added check with respect to making sure that the people that are coming to this country, and I agree with Hadley, we don't want to get rid of the brightest and the best, but unfortunately, this is a consequence of it.
Okay, Hadley, do you have a response for that?
Sure. All of these questions really ultimately have one thing in common, and that is, what does the United States owe to people who are not citizens of this country? What do we owe to visitors? What do we owe to people who are here who may not have followed legal channels to be here? And those questions have been blown wide open during the second Trump administration. I think that we owe a process. We may not owe the same process, but we should strive for fairness. I agree. We'll never reach perfect fairness. It's not fair where people are born. We don't get to choose the circumstances of our birth. But in terms of how we treat people and what the process is, I think as long as there is a process and as long as we remember that the goal of the federal government is not to treat everyone around the world with the same sets of rights and privileges, the goal of our federal government in the United States is to serve the national interests of the United States and our citizens, then we can, work between those two different values and those two different parameters to try to do the best we can by citizens and non-citizens alike.
Okay, then Hadley, let me ask you this then. What is the right balance between welcoming students and protecting the U.S.?
I think in the vetting process, which is what we're talking about now, that's the place where we, ideally screen people who are applying for a visa, for a student visa, for a travel visa, for any type of visa, keeping in mind that, although the southern border of the United States gets a lot of attention, there's also an enormous amount of illegal immigration that is the result of visa overstays. So we have to be cautious about when we allow people to cross the border or enter through any port of entry with a visa, with any type of permission to enter the United States. That's where we should be most cautious, and that's where we should be doing screening like this. So I believe a review of someone's social media is not totally off the table. We all have to be careful what we post on social media, depending on what's allowed by our employer, what's allowed by our free speech parameters, if we're a citizen, if we're not a citizen. So we have to be careful with that type of information, what we're sharing. I think it's fair for the State Department to do that review, but I think the best time to do it is during the vetting process. Once people are here in the United States, once we've allowed them to enter the United States and they're here with a legitimate visa, with a legitimate legal status, then I think it becomes a much more difficult question of what evidence needs to be met, what process needs to happen in order for that person to potentially be removed or have their visa revoked. Those are two different questions to my mind, and I think it's fine for the State Department to put more parameters on the vetting process because that's the place where we should be most cautious.
Okay, Mike, is the issue of student visas a national security issue?
That's a very good question, Don. I don't know if it's a national security issue, but back to what Hedley was saying, I think there is this balance of how do you properly vet folks that are coming here, and then as they stay throughout their duration, what are they doing, right? Because I think I don't know if it's a national security issue, or I can't imagine that Tammy Bruce over at the State Department or Marco Rubio have mentioned that it is this national security issue, but I just think, as Hedley said, there needs to be a little bit more of a vetting process that's more thorough, that's more aligned, that everybody is following. So I can't answer that accurately, Don, because I don't have clear-cut numbers that say that folks that are coming here from student visa programs that are let in by universities and go through the proper checks have then gone on their ways to either commit crimes, harm American citizens, do different things on social media that are antithetical to the United States government or things like that. Like, I don't have clear-cut examples and numbers of that, so I can't connect it, the dots for you. But unfortunately, what I can say is that the process is changing, and I think with that change, people are going to have to adapt to that change and make sure, like Hedley said, there are consequences on social media right now if I post something and my employer doesn't like it, and vice versa, right? And that's a public company, could be a private company that's upset with the way I handled something. So the process is changing. Make sure you find out that you know more about the process so you have everything in line. When you do apply, get accepted, and then you do come for that interview and you do ultimately get accepted into this country.
Okay, Hadley, same question to you. Is it or should the U.S. treat student visas as a national security issue?
I believe they should. I believe anyone who enters this country has some relevance to our national security, because what happens inside of our borders is our responsibility. It's our responsibility to try to provide the safest environment for the American public, for citizens and non-citizens alike who are here. So while there may be, some different parts of our immigration system where we see, people who have been accused of being, for example, affiliated with gangs or affiliated with terrorist organizations, the concern with student visas is more likely to be people who are extremely intelligent, highly qualified, but come from countries where there are parties or regimes that are not friendly to the United States. And the concern would be, ultimately, does that student here on a visa have loyalty to the United States that supersedes whatever their interest in their home country might be? And this comes down to things like, if you have family at home, if you have a business, a family business at home in your home country, if that country is not as democratic as the United States, doesn't have the same rule of law as the United States, are those home countries going to potentially lean on those students who are here in the United States to do things that may not be in our national interest, whether that comes to, intelligence, do things that might cause a public safety issue in the United States ultimately? So I believe everyone who enters the United States is a question of national security. It may look different depending on the type of visa that we're talking about or the type of immigration that we're talking about.
Okay, I just have one more question for you guys, and then we'll call it a day. It's on a slightly different topic. There's new guidance from the DHS that lawmakers will face new restrictions when visiting ICE facilities. Some are saying that it undermines their oversight authority. I'll get your comments each on this question. Mike, what do you think?
Well, I mean, this is something a little bit close to me because I just had Congressman Glenn Ivey on the show. I talked to Congressman Goldman after what just played on the package before we hopped on to ask him about, what it was he was trying to accomplish. I've heard kind of the same refrain from Democrats that have come on the program to talk about this. They feel that people are being detained without due process. They want to go there and see more. I make more of the argument of it's a political stunt. Like, let's call it a little bit of what it is on its surface, right? Like, maybe there's some good intentions behind it, but what is the ultimate goal of going to one of these centers when all you're doing is putting law enforcement at risk, potentially showing up there like we're seeing in what happened with the New York City comptroller, although that was at an immigration hearing, that was something completely separate. So I think, again, this is back to what we were talking about with the last topic, process, right? Putting a procedure in place. I know DHS has said now that, you have to properly do this within a 72-hour window. Representative Goldman and Nadler maintained that they did do that within a 72-hour window. So they're like, wait a minute, we're following the procedures here. We put in a request for this. We saw that it turned out peaceful with respect to what he was asking that person outside of the facility. So hopefully it stays to that level and doesn't rise to where we're getting, Senator Padilla and Rod Baracus Newark arrested, who are public officials who are just standing there asking questions of elected officials. So I think the process needs to be cleaned up a little bit more. I think for Democrats out there that are doing this, and even for Republicans that have done it prior to, like, let's not make a political stunt out of this. If you truly feel this way about the issue, go about it from a public messaging standpoint in a different direction than doing these type of stunts that are ultimately only going to benefit you and not are benefiting your constituents.
Okay, Hadley, final thoughts.
Another theme that is similar between the student visas and the ICE facilities and the changes required